Welcome to the Brookline Booksmiths Author Event Series. Today, we are featuring authors Juliana Spink Mills, Marika Bailey, and Valerie Valdes in their book Fit for the Gods. And it's going to be in conversation with one of our book editors, Jenn Northington. My name is Jessica Young, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a bookseller and events assistant here at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. And if this is your first time hearing about us, welcome. Thank you for being a part of our community today and for making us your independent bookstore with your attendance and your book purchases. Tonight, we have 4 wonderful speakers on our event panel. First, we have the editor extraordinaire, Jenn Northington. As a former bookseller and current reviewer, podcaster, and editor, she's been published in various places, including Selfish Magazine and Book Riot, where she also works wrangling editorial operations. Welcome, Jenn. And then one of our brilliant speakers and authors this evening is the Anglo-Brazilian author Juliana Spink Mills, who was born in London and grew up in Sao Paulo. They now live in the United States, where they write speculative fiction and have a soft spot for making their characters suffer. Juliana's stories have appeared in several anthologies, including the Bram Stoker Award-nominated Not All Monsters. And besides writing, Juliana works as a Portuguese-English translator and as a library assistant. Another delightful author from this fantastic collection is Marika Bailey. She is an Afro-Caribbean author, designer, and illustrator, and her fiction has previously appeared in the FIYAH, Fantasy Magazine, Apparition Lit, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Strange Horizons. Given a book of unabridged Greek myths at a very impressionable age, she has been writing ever since. And as a graduate of Yale University with a degree in fine arts, Marika lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her husband and the softest cat in the world, although I actually think that has changed. And then our final author for this evening with a beautiful story about Atlanta is the exquisite Valerie Valdes. She lives in an elaborate meme palace with her husband and kids, where she writes, edits, and moonlights as a muse. When she isn't working, she enjoys playing video games and admiring the outdoors from the safety of her living room. And her debut novel, Chilling Effect, was shortlisted for the 2021 Arthur C. Clarke Award and was named one of the Library Journal's best science fiction/fantasy novels of 2019. Valerie is a co-editor of Escape Pod, and her short fiction and poetry have been featured in Uncanny Magazine and Nightmare Magazine. And so the book we are all here to talk about today is Fit for the Gods, Greek Mythology Reimagined. Zeus, Athena, Apollo, Aphrodite, and all of the fellow Olympians feel almost as real and larger than life today as they did when they were actively worshipped as gods. Humanity has told and retold stories about the characters from Greek and Roman myths for centuries, yet the authors in this collection, how these tales have the power to metamorphosis would be, it is impressive to Ovid. So it is my pleasure to welcome all of these speakers tonight. I'm so happy to have them here. So please help me welcome to Brookline Booksmith, all 4 of our panel. Woo!
Hooray! Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you, Brookline Booksmith. I am a former independent bookseller, so I always am excited to work with stores, and they've been wonderful. So, and hello to everybody in the audience. I'm selfishly extremely excited about this because this is literally the first time I've seen these 3 faces, even though we've been emailing for like literal years in some cases. And I will actually get to hear them talk about their stories. So this is just as exciting for me as it is for anyone else. And so, yes, I'm Jenn Northington. I co-edited this with Sharifa Williams, Zainab Williams, who could not make it tonight, but is here in spirit with us. And I wanted to start with everybody going around and telling our audience the characters you wrote, character or characters, and like your one sentence elevator pitch about this story. Valerie, let's start with you.
So I wrote about Atalanta and Hippomenes. They are already married at the beginning of the story, and it is a story about a space race.
It is. It has a lot of explosions and action and a lot of jokes and a lot of Easter eggs for the fans of Greek mythology. So I was like there's one. Everybody did that really well, actually. All right, Marika, let's go to you.
Hi, I wrote about Daphne and Apollo, which is probably a little bit more niche than a lot of the other stories. Spoiler, Daphne gets turned into a tree. And the story is essentially about finding strength and purpose in things that happen to you, even if they are not good things.
I still get goosebumps every time I like think about the opening of that story. The one of the titles is To Shiver, and it's very appropriate. That story gives me the shivers every time. Juliana?
So I wrote about Odysseus and Circe, but also Penelope. She's both Penelope and Circe. But it's told from the point of view of Scylla. It's actually not told from their point of view at all. So at heart, it's actually still a story. It's set in modern day Brazil, and it's a story about rediscovering yourself, I guess, about freedom and rediscovering who you really are at heart.
Yeah, it's also so full of references and Easter eggs and so atmospheric and beautiful. I'm really excited. It's just like exciting to get to talk to y'all about your stories. Juliana, we're going to stay with you. You came in through the open call. Did you already have this story like in your head, or did you see the open call and you have to think about it? How did it come to you?
So I had a rough draft of something I'd been working on, and it just wasn't clicking, when there's something missing, and I kind of shelved it and stuck it away in my hard drive. And, and then when the open call came out, like the story already had, when I was writing it, I was like, this has a little bit of kind of a Greek feel to it. I already mentioned, there was mentions of Penelope and then when I saw the open call, I was like, this is what I was missing. This is, like the thematic nudge I was needing to complete it. So everything just kind of fit together after that.
I love that. That's so cool. That's awesome. Valerie, you came in through the open call as well. What was your origin story here?
So I actually worked something up for this specifically. My usual process is that, I check my idea file, see if anything sticks out. And if nothing does, then I'll brainstorm and kind of go through my favorite option. But for this one, it was the brainstorming method. I didn't have anything in my idea file that was Greek mythology themed. So I made a list of potential characters I wanted to write about, and did some research, came up with some different angles, and settled on Atalanta. There's a particular part of the myth that I guess we'll probably talk about later, depending on the questions that we reach, but it stuck out to me, and that was the thing that snagged. So yeah, then that's what I went for.
Note to self, make sure to get to that question. And Marika, I emailed you. I had read some of your short fiction. I read a story in Faya and I think Uncanny, maybe a couple of other places. And so I reached out to you and I was like, please write me a story. What were you thinking when you got that email?
Well, first of all, surprise, because that was the first time that had ever happened to me. So that was awesome. That was an awesome email to get. And then immediately I thought I was going to write a story about Psyche and Eros. That was my initial thought, and it didn't go well in that it was supposed to be a short story, and it is now currently at maybe 30,000 words. Like, it's still on my computer, just on its way to becoming a novel. It did not want to be a short story. And I was really struggling with that. And then I was in a car in Vancouver, doing the ADHD thing of imagining a little person running along the car as you're driving. And the first line came to me about the idea of running and the idea of dying. And so I think I wrote the first draft of the story in maybe 2 afternoons, which never happens to me ever. And it just came to life of its own free will at a certain point.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was going through old emails, and first of all, I was astonished that I had already started sending out queries for that before Swordstone Table, which was my previous anthology I worked on with Swapna Krishna, was even out. I was like, what was 2021 me doing? Like, but it worked out really well. And I saw those emails and I was like, oh, right, Psyche and Eros, I forgot about that, but I could not be happier with where you landed. So yeah. Well, okay, to stay with you for a second, it's in your bio that, Jessica read to us, like you were handed a very extensive book of Greek mythology and, have been writing ever since. So that's your writer origin story as well?
I think so. I mean, I've always been a reader, just like that kid that you couldn't find and you had to go look for. And I was in a corner somewhere with a book. And my mother and I moved to America from the Caribbean when I was 4 years old. And we lived in this tiny cramped little apartment. And I actually slept like on a cot in my aunt's room. So like, this is the tiniest of Brooklyn apartments. And I only had 2 books. And those are the 2 books that I remember ever having, first books I ever remember having in my life. And one of them was an illustrated book of Greek myths, and the other one was an illustrated Bible. And I slept with them both under my pillow every night, to the point where like I would wake up with like illustrations on my face in the morning. But I also don't think my mother really reckoned with the mashing together, like, here's a book of myths and here's a book of the Bible, and we're just gonna put those on equal footing for this young child as like foundational about what the world is like. And I think it's just given me a kind of very dramatic reading of the stories we tell ourselves to explain our history and explain why we do things, and to kind of like explain changes in the world and changes in emotions and how we should or could be processing them. So I say all credit to my mom, or perhaps all blame to my mom, however she wants to take that.
That seems fair. Juliana, what about you? How did you come to Greek mythology?
Well, we had a lot of books on myths and fairy tales at home. We had beautifully illustrated Hans Christian Andersen. We had Irish folk tales. We had Old English fairy tales, Brazilian folk tales. We had a bit of everything. And in the middle of all this, there was this big encyclopedia of mythology, like it had different myths from all around the world. And I think that all kind of blended in my head together with The Hobbit and Narnia and like all the kind of stuff I liked reading as a kid. And it wasn't really until I think I was maybe in 8th grade and we were reading the Odyssey and the Iliad. And I think that was when I started actually categorizing into, this is Greek, this is Roman, this is Tolkien, and so on. This is Norse mythology. And, actually, but as a kid, it was just like all these wonderful stories just mixed up together.
Yeah, kind of like Marika rather. That's funny. Valerie, what about you?
Yeah, so I also am from the like, oh, I read this stuff in childhood. I could not tell you exactly when I started, but I definitely still have my copy of this extremely loved copy of Gods, Demigods, and Demons, an encyclopedia of Greek mythology by Bernard Evslin. And it is just, I have never lost that book. And so I don't know if I got it in school or if I got it at, like a Scholastic Book Fair kind of thing, but I just never stopped being interested in the stories, the characters, all the drama, the adventure. At the time, I didn't have like a conceptual distinction between divine magic and other magic. D&D came later, but it was all, fighting monsters and magic powers and enchanted objects and all that stuff was very cool. And then as I grew up, now I have like a whole bookshelf devoted to Homer and Ovid and Apollonius and all the Greek playwrights, comedy, tragedy. I studied ancient Greek for a semester in college because I had this notion like, eventually I will be able to read this in the original language. They never offered another semester of it. So I have literally 1 semester of ancient Greek under my belt before I had to switch to French. But the dream is alive.
It's real. Does Duolingo have ancient Greek? Like,
I don't think they do. They have Latin and it's okay.
They have Klingon in there. I know.
The Oxford course is a little better.
I believe that. Right. Juliana, you'll know this firsthand as a translator. I always feel like I wish I was fluent enough to read something in its original language. And my dream is also, I took Arabic in college and I have stuff on the shelf, but like, it's rusty. It's rusty. Okay, right. So next question that I have for you all is that you each chose a character or characters that other people have written about. We've got Circe and Penelope, we've got Atalanta, and we've got Daphne. Some are more popularly written about than others. I think, Juliana, you had the most two retold characters. So I'm going to start with Marika. Had you already read a retelling of Daphne and Apollo and thought like, oh, I think it goes, in my head, it goes like this? Or, you know, how did you go about, like, what was it about that story specifically, aside from the running bit?
I think it was not just, I hadn't read an actual retelling of it anywhere, but there's this thread in Greek mythology about being wronged, and then you get turned into a constellation, or you get turned into a porpoise, or you know, like you get turned into a stag and eaten. And I was kind of sitting with, at what point did being turned into a tree, how is that helping me? Like, this from her point of view, how would I feel if I'm having the worst day ever and a god is chasing me down, and the response to that in reparations is, and now you get to be a tree, congratulations. And that's kind of where the story went, of just, you know, what's the rubric for punishments or gifts when it comes to Greek myths. And it just went from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, not to spoiler anything, but like the restitution, I don't know if restitution is actually the right word, revenge might be a better word, is very satisfying at the end of your story. So I think it works out nicely to make that lemonade out of those lemons, to put it mildly. Juliana, what about you? Circe and Penelope, I mean, you said you already had the story, sort of. Were they really already in there?
I kind of came at it from a different angle, because I was building on an existing draft, but I already had mentions of Penelope in the original draft, because I always liked the story about how Penelope would unstitch weaving at night, and you know, so that she wouldn't be forced to marry somebody else while her husband was away. And I was like, well, what if it's the other way around? What if it's because she didn't want to get married in the first place, you know? So the other characters just fell into place once the whole thing kind of came together, except that for some reason it wouldn't come from either of them, like from Penelope's point of view. For some reason it was like as an external story voice, and that's how I came about the idea of having Scylla tell the story. And that was something that was a little more out. I had to kind of go search for the links and the connections. And in some versions of the story, Circe is the one responsible for turning Scylla into a monster. So I was like, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Circe can be the one to help her remake herself instead.
I love that. I love that so much. It is also, again, a very satisfying ending. All of you wrote very satisfying endings for your stories, which is hard. Short stories are really hard, in case you don't know that, y'all. Like, short stories are incredibly difficult. I mean, they turn into novels when you're not looking. Like, it's very tricky. Valerie, I'm hoping this is the question that you were hoping we would get to. Is it? Is this the right question?
It's not, but that's okay.
Okay.
I also have not read any retellings. I've only read translated versions of the original myths. So I definitely came into it with those kind of ideas and preconceptions in mind, rather than seeing newer stuff and wanting to, do fix about it. But I definitely read Apollonius and was like, his whole thing is, no, we cannot have Atalanta on the Argo. She will cause problems because she would be the only woman, and she is too hot, and the men will have their manly urges, and so we cannot have her. And I was like, no, shut up. So there's certainly a compelling story there, right, about a woman who's being kind of like singled out for harassment by her peers on a boat, but that was super not what I wanted to tell a story about. So yeah, Apollonius was my guy that I was just like, not it, not you. You are the wrong one here.
Incorrect. Awesome. I love that. Well, speaking of stories being hard, for anybody who wants to tackle this one, what was the hardest part of writing a mythology retelling?
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
To me, the hardest part was letting go of the existing myth, and remembering that it's a retelling and not an exact replica, but it's still hard to find the confidence to like draw from that source material, but then let go of it and allow the story to be its own thing.
Yeah, my answer is very similar. It was definitely like, what stuff am I going to keep from the original myth? What am I going to discard? How am I going to still be respectful to the origins? Because some things, if you take too much poetic license, then it can end up kind of crossing a line. And then Atalanta in particular, there are multiple stories, multiple iterations. There's effectively kind of two major changes. Most people know the foot race and the Golden Apple version, but the Atalanta on the Argo, again, there's like dispute in the stories as to whether that was her or a different Atalanta. But definitely I wanted them to be combined. I decided that it was going to be the same one. So that decision was initially kind of a tough one. Like, am I going to tell a foot race story? Am I going to tell a boar hunting story? I was like, ¿por qué no los dos? And so that's where I ended up.
Perfect.
I think the most difficult part for me was balancing the voice of this individual character who is kind of a cipher. You don't really hear about this person who had this thing happen to her in the original story. She's almost, in a certain sense, a footnote in her own story to explain why Apollo gets laurel leaves. And so it's kind of, how do you respectfully make someone's history when you don't really know anything about them? And I wanted this to be not just a story about this particular time, but the fact that this story is a replication of many particular times of getting a story from a certain perspective that kind of does more than erase a character. It turns a character who was wronged and makes them part of someone else's story. So you're not just hurting them, you're also then kind of like appropriating a little part of them and turning them into a story about their oppressor. And I really wanted to unravel that under 80,000 words. And that was the hardest part for me. It was
So
also
hard.
brevity.
Yeah, it's really hard. I am looking forward to your eventual Eros and Psyche novel, side note. So,
So am I. I can't wait to see what happens with that.
We'll see. Hopefully we'll see it. So it's so true. When you have a story or a mythology that you love and you want to be respectful, but you're also making it your own, like these are the difficulties, but also, all of you brought in so many other things to your stories. So again, like whoever wants to tackle it, or actually, no, I'm going to call on you. I'm going to make you all answer this one because I really want to know the answer. So Valerie, something that influenced your story that has nothing to do with Greek mythology.
Okay, so when I started, like I said, as I was brainstorming ideas, I knew ultimately I did want to tell a story that involved a race because it is Atalanta. So, and I wanted it to be space opera, so space race. But did I actually want it to be in space, or did I want it to be like on a planet, on an asteroid, something like that? And while I was trying to decide, I started researching the different planets in our solar system because initially I was kind of like, oh, I'm going to set it here, I'm going to make it a local thing. And I came across pictures of the Noctis Labyrinthus, which is a region of Mars that it's Latin for the labyrinth of night, which already is very evocative. And it's basically just this maze of these like very deep valleys with high walls. There's pits, there's craters. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is where a high-speed sci-fi spaceship race needs to occur. So I didn't set my story on Mars ultimately, but I stole that location and tweaked it for maximum race coolness.
Yes, super cool. I was like, it's like a Fast and Furious movie, only not, and it's amazing. I'm a big fan of that franchise, so it's made me very happy. Juliana.
So when my brother and I were small, my mom took time off from work to stay home with us, but she was also working on her doctorate. And at the same time, she was learning ceramics, like really seriously, taking lessons from like really great artists and stuff like that. And she was a really good artist. So it came to this point where she defended her thesis and she was ready to go back to work, and she had to kind of pick which way to go, art and ceramics or academia. And she chose academia, but we still have a lot of her pottery fish around, and they're amazing. And that's kind of I couldn't get the pottery fish out of my mind. They just fit so well into the story. So instead of the weaving, my Penelope is ceramicist. So
that's amazing, because your descriptions of these ceramic fish are so detailed and like vivid. And now I understand a little bit better why. I'm like, maybe I can get you to send me some pictures because I would love to see your demonstration.
She had the full setup. She had the kiln and the pottery wheel.
Wow.
The whole backyard studio.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. What about you, Marika?
There are two things that really influenced this story, and the first is my obsession with the plant that's called the yellow aspen. It is a plant, the largest organism in the world, and it's basically a plant that reproduces via cloning itself. It's much in the way a spider plant reproduces. So it can be an entire, like you can see like an entire mile of these trees that look like individual trees, but it's actually all one tree that has grown by cloning itself. And that's just very cool. I really love the idea of animals that are immortal in weird ways. You know how like lobsters are immortal in theory, they can just keep growing forever. And secondly, it was a book which I am kind of an evangelist about. It's called Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, and it's about mushrooms, and not just mushrooms, but fungi. And there's a part of the book about how fungi are instrumental in plant communication and how plants talk to each other. And so that really influenced this idea of different ways of communicating and different kinds of intelligences. And I think that that book has had like a very specific like influence on multiple stories. So, and I'm always telling people to read this book. So if you're interested in fungi or language, go read the book.
Fungi, like speculative fiction, is a whole subgenre now. Like there's a lot of it actually, and some of it I am very into. Oh, Wen Yang, who's another one of our contributors, is in the chat like, yes, fungi. Some of it I'm very into, and some of it really freaks me out because it's like the horror kind of fungi, like, you know, face bursting mushrooms, which just I cannot. But anyway, I'm into it. I remember I had just read an essay by Adrienne Marie Brown that referenced mycology when I was reading your story. And I was like, everybody's talking to me about fungus. Like it's just coming from all angles. I'm into it for the most part, as long as we don't go the horror route. Okay, let's see. What do I want to ask? How much time do I have? Oh, I have plenty of time. Was there anything that you specifically wanted to avoid when crafting your story? Like we've talked a lot about like, okay, I want to do this. Like, I know I have to leave some things out, but was there anything you were like, I really don't want to X? Yes.
So first of all, divine retribution. I did not want to get struck by lightning for doing an oopsies. But so unlike Marika, I did not want to retell a myth in which the woman was being punished for being the victim of sexual assault. Because it is like she was talking about, it's a god usually who does the deeds, like, oh, the Zeus is loose, and then, you know, Hera gets mad or whatever, and suddenly the girl's a constellation, like you said. And within the Atalantum specifically, though, because so like that any branch of story, branch, sorry, that was like that was not going to be something I was gonna engage with. Not that it shouldn't be engaged with, but it was not going to be me. But and within the Atalanta myth, the race being her dad trying to sell her off, I that really undermines her agency in ways that are very myth, consistent. But that was just not what I was going to tell a story about either. So I just took him out of the equation entirely. The race is her idea, her choice, and she does what she feels like doing within that race. So
Yeah, that was a fun twist on that. I really appreciated that. Anybody else? I won't put you on the spot if you don't want to answer.
I can go. I really wanted to avoid the idea that Daphne's story ends when she becomes turned into a tree, because that is technically where the story ends. We literally don't know anything other than that she's memorialized as part of worship to Apollo. And I really wanted to show that the worst thing to ever happen to Daphne is not Daphne's story. And that, the continuance, the continued life is Daphne's story. And I really wanted to avoid making it about Apollo.
Yes. 2 thumbs up.
I think my answer has a little bit of that. With I love an open-ended story. I absolutely love stories that go beyond what you read on the page. So I really wanted to avoid having like everything too neatly tied in. I wanted to give the sense that the character stories is actually just starting. The next step is waiting for them.
Nice. Yeah. I both love them and sometimes want to throw those across the room. I'm like, no, you have to tell me. And then I just write my own ending, which I think is the point, right? That's obviously the point. But it's one of my favorite infuriating tropes as a reader. So I love it and I hate it. Okay, let's see. Let's go to, this one I especially wanted to hear from you, Valerie. So how did writing this compare to the kinds of things you usually write, right? Because you've got the series, you've got a new book coming out, like it's all space-ish, right? So like space is your thing, is your jam, which I'm a huge fan of. But so did it feel very different or did it feel like kind of like usual?
no, this is me. I do like to write a lot of different stuff, like I feel like my Last Uncanny Story is also a little bit of a different vibe, but space opera is definitely my jam. So super on brand for me. I tend to write a particular kind of strong woman character. So my brand. And I actually really like writing about people who are in committed relationships. I feel like that's a fun angle. That there are a lot of romance stories, capital R romance stories that are about people meeting each other for the first time, falling in love, and that kind of new relationship energy. But I like old relationship energy. I like when it's, people who've been together for a long time. So the marriage race story was not the story that I wanted to tell, but it was in the history of the story that I told. The part of the myth that I snagged on when I was doing my research was the part where they're already married and they get in trouble for, unsanctioned activities in a temple, which is another thing that people get in trouble for in multiple myths. And so that also definitely was my brand.
Yes, opening paragraph of the story even. It's so good. It's so good. And Marika, you write a lot of short fiction. So did this feel similar or did it feel different?
Oh, this is super on brand for me. Like Valerie says, maybe not necessarily, I don't think I have maybe like one other story that is incredibly nominally tied to Greek mythology, a retelling of the Minotaur story, but from the point of view of his sister. But I think my where I stand as a writer is I like to tell stories that have what I call like umami, like that intense satisfaction at the end of it. What I want is if you finish a story that I have written, you feel like you've gotten everything you wanted to get out of that meal. And so I think that in this case, that's what I wanted to write, and I got it on the page. And I also, like Valerie, write, I think, mostly female characters who are dark-skinned women of color, because just as from a young age, loving speculative fiction and not seeing enough speculative fiction around people who looked like me. That is kind of a part of my reason for writing, is to repair that lack of being seen for however many people manage to find my work.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, we talk about this in the introduction of the anthology, which is that, you know, I had picked up Edith Hamilton's Mythology and was rereading it just like for funsies. And I was like, ooh, like she's just going on and on about how, like, you know, from her own perspective, like the Greco-Roman stuff was like the pinnacle of civilization, but she is whitewashing it. Like we know that the Greek and Roman civilizations were incredibly international and diverse, and there were a lot of different people who were part of those cultures. Like it was more than one culture. Like there's a lot going on in the ancient world. Like this is literally what I did my bachelor's thesis on. So it gets me going, and it's hard to get me to stop. But we don't get to see that often in present times in the stories that get the dollars, that get, you know, the book. And there are great retellings out there, but there's so much more room and there's so many more stories to tell. So I mean, this is literally what this collection was about. Juliana, so you translate and you write. Is that like two different halves of your brain? Do you have to turn off one to turn on the other? What is that like?
Well, I don't do fiction translations. I do academic translations, so completely different sides. I do a lot of like academic sort of social psychology and stuff like that. So that's, you know, for me, this was definitely a departure from what I usually write in fiction. No one was getting stabbed. There were no big action scenes. The pacing is very slow build, and that's not something I usually do, but it just worked in this story. And I think I had a lot of difficulty just reining back and being like, no, it's okay. You don't need to stab anyone. We can keep going, you know, it's fine.
You don't need to stab anyone, and old relationship energy. Like I'm loving all of this. This is all really great. I mean, I will take a stabbing, but I think you did not need it. This story didn't need a stabbing. You managed to tell it without a stabbing successfully. So.
No, we had death by fish instead.
Exactly. You had, like, you know, cursed fish. It worked out. It still went there. Okay. Favorite mythology character, any mythology, doesn't have to be Greco-Roman, any mythology at all, or why you don't have one, like a favorite.
In terms of Greek mythology, I don't really have one favorite. I tend to like the side characters better than the main character. I like the minor gods and goddesses. I like the nymphs and nature spirits. Give me Icarus instead of Daedalus. I like the sort of side characters. But if we're expanding to other mythologies, I mean, we have some great Brazilian myths, which, you know, Brazil's a bit like the States, we have people from all different parts of the world who settled there. And then we have the indigenous peoples myths. We have mythologies that came over from religions that came over from Africa, with the enslaved peoples. We have this mishmash of different, you know, and it's really, really interesting. And there's one that I love just because I find it hilarious, which is the myth of the Boto. And Boto is basically a river dolphin up in the Amazon region. And he's not a were-dolphin, it's the other way around. He's a were-person because he transforms into a man and he goes off and seduces the young unmarried ladies who live on the riverbank communities. So if somebody would turn up pregnant, they would say, oh, I was seduced by the Boto. You know, it was the ultimate excuse. It's not my fault, I was seduced by the river dolphin. But he would turn up as a very dashing gentleman, all dressed in white with a white fedora to cover up the blowhole on top of his head.
Who could resist? I mean, sounds very compelling. That's amazing.
And very in line with Greek mythology too. I mean,
true. It's true.
Apollo.
Yeah. Hopefully more consensual. One can only hope, but
one would hope.
Yeah.
I think my favorite characters from mythology would be two very similar characters from diasporic Black mythology, Brer Rabbit and Anansi, who are both very much trickster characters, and they're always, I think in my mind, they're kind of like about appending power and power structures and narratives, and that's why I love them so much, and I'm kind of always inserting them in various ways and various stories, the idea of kind of like these gods of the unexpected, and about using mockery to take apart power and structures and oppressive societies. And I think that like those characters are just incredibly necessary, especially in the world we live in now, thinking about ways in which changing narrative is in many ways kinds of a way of dismantling power.
Nice. I love that. I love that. Trickster stories are also a favorite of mine. And you get them. I mean, it's like Juliana was saying, there's certain commonalities and myths across the world, but then each culture has their own like amazing version of it. So fun. So fun. Valerie, you wanna tackle this one?
Yeah, I don't have any single favorite, but surprising no one, I'm sure. Just any sort of battle women characters, and any, Atalanta, Athena, Artemis, the Amazons, from other, the Valkyries, the Morrigan, just anyone that had a weapon and stabbed someone with it basically was definitely high on my list. I was a very violent child. Am I a violent adult? Probably. Now it's all fictional.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. That's what writing and video games are for, right?
Exactly.
So you can stab people and not have to, worry about the consequences.
We're back to the stabbing.
Yes, I know. There's commonalities here. I'm digging it. I like the overlap that's happening. A stabby Venn diagram is, a fun one. So, all right, let's see. What else do I want to ask you about? Oh, before we get to the total end of this, let me ask this one. What are you working on that you want to tell people about? Let's have a moment for pitching whatever else you want to pitch. Nobody wants to go first. Juliana, go first. I'm going to make you go first.
I don't have anything coming out anytime soon, but I'm working on a couple of other short stories for Open Call, so fingers crossed for that. And I've just started something new, which I'm really excited about, which is about a coven of middle-aged witches. So they may be stabbing. I haven't decided yet.
I mean, I could see there being stabbing in that.
All right. Well, I have a book coming out at the end of the month, so everybody should go get it. It's space. We'll call it space romantasy, I guess. It's basically kind of like The Mandalorian meets Voltron. It's a road trip. The main character is a soldier turned refugee, in hiding on a planet, Obi-Wan style, has to kind of come out of hiding to save the planet from giant robots.
Like you do.
As you do, yeah. And I'm also working on some other romantasies, but we'll see what unfolds there.
Romantasy, if you are not familiar with that, I think it's a portmanteau. I never remember the right word for that. Romance, fantasy, smooshed together. And you can have them in space. It can be fantasy in space. Side note, all correct and possible. There's no genre you can't smash together. What about you, Marika?
I actually soon-ish will have a story coming out from Lightspeed that I'm very excited about. It's about what you're willing to do to save your daughter from what you went through. But it's also about witches, and it is my personal tribute to Granny Weatherwax, the greatest witch of all time in my heart anyway. And I hope to be able to, give like an actual date on that soon. But also with the love and support of everyone watching today, I am also determined to finish that Psyche and Eros story.
So I will tell you a story about Granny Weatherwax. So my co-editor, Sharifa, and I do a podcast for Book Riot called SFF Yeah, and she is a diehard Discworld fan. And I had never read any of the Discworld books up until like extremely recently. And I got buried in the online, like, which one there's like 40 bajillion of them. Where do you start? Do you start over here? Do you start over there? Do you start there? And she was like, this one. She gave me the Granny Weatherwax. Oh, and now I'm gonna embarrass myself and not remember the title, but it's like a Hamlet retelling with Granny Weatherwax and her coven. And it was so delightful. And so like Granny Weatherwax was my introduction to Discworld, which feels 100% correct to me. So yes, I support the Granny Weatherwax love. Awesome. Okay, let's see. We have time for a couple more. Do you have a least favorite mythological character? I don't know how anybody can like Zeus. Weird Sisters, yes, Valerie, that's the book. Weird Sisters is the book. I really don't know. I mean, I can find something to like about pretty much every other Greek god and goddess, and I can't think of a hated other mythology, but like, does Zeus have a single redeeming quality? I don't think he does.
Zeus is the worst.
He's the worst. I think he's the worst. Yeah, not a fan. Do y'all have like a hated mythological character?
I really want to defend Hera. Like, I understand.
Yes.
I want to defend her.
Mm-hmm.
She's been through a lot. First of all, did she want to marry her brother? Very few people do. Like, not to mention she has to marry this guy. She didn't volunteer to marry this guy. And then this guy basically will drop his toga for anyone, anything. Doesn't even have to be human. Just absolutely no idea what the meaning of fidelity is. However, I don't necessarily need to like kill everybody associated with him. I don't know what Hercules did other than be born. A lot of the women that she killed or had revenge upon weren't exactly like jumping at Zeus, rather jumping away from Zeus. I want better things for Hera, but I feel like Hera needs to love herself more, get some therapy, maybe a divorce. She was a loving mother to her own kids, all of whom were horrible. But, I just not, I can't stick with her. I'm sorry.
Seems very fair.
Definitely you need an Olympian god of therapy up there to
Yes, truly.
issues. I love that. That's very good.
Me writing down Hera is actually just putting all these people in the Zeus protection program, and that's a story that I'm just making a quick note here. I'm gonna like Hera apologism. She's got a bad rep. I'm also gonna throw Jason under the bus, by the way. That guy sucks. What he did to Medea? What a jerk.
Yeah.
Justice for Medea. I'm sorry. Jason's horrible. Jason's hard. There's not a lot of good husbands rolling around Greek mythology, and I'm really struggling to think of one. I put it in the chat if you can think of one. Hephaestus was a good husband.
Yeah, pobrecito.
Went Oedipus. Yeah, that's a
Yo. Too soon. Hashtag too soon.
We've got the Pandavas also being shouted out in the chat as being the worst. Love it. Juliana, do you have a worst?
My gosh. I think we've kind of covered it here. I have to say, I do like stories, like modern stories where all these male gods kind of have to face what, I love the take that Rick Riordan did with the Trials of Apollo series, where basically he's like human and just like a really ordinary human teenage boy, and he has to regain his godhood, and I just love that take on it. That's so yeah, I think definitely stories where they get all that taken away and they just have to
Yeah.
Shout out to Laura Olympus for also throwing Apollo under the bus. He deserved it.
Oh, amazing. Oh,
I would like to, somebody mentioned Orpheus in the chat. So first of all, thank you, because now I can bring up that I do have 2 other Greek retelling stories. I did write a story based on Orpheus and Eurydice. And is he a good husband?
Well,
questions have been asked.
Questions. I have an Orpheus and I have like a queer Orpheus and Eurydice retelling on my TBR right now that I will find the name of and put it on Blue Sky or something somewhere. Because I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'm really excited about it.
he definitely got ahead. Sorry.
Hey.
Too soon. Hashtag too soon.
Oh no. Hadestown, I'm just like looking at the chat now. Sorry. This is when it moves, my eye just goes right there. Hadestown is something I need to investigate because I hear amazing things and I have not yet experienced the amazingness. So it's on my list. Thank you for the mentions. So Juliana, you picked Rick Riordan. Jessica, were you gonna do this? I saw the question in the chat about Rick Riordan. Should we talk about that? Okay, we'll talk about that. So anonymous attendee asks, Rick Riordan's books and his publishing initiative, aye or nay? The publishing initiative especially, I'm like 2 thumbs up. I mean, we're getting stories that from all different kinds of cultures, and mostly they're people from those cultures getting to tell them, which is really important and valuable, and something that we didn't do here, which is a miss for us. So learning moments, but yeah, I think it's super interesting. I have read several of also the original books and enjoyed them. What are y'all? Well, Juliana, obviously you're a fan.
Well, I work in a library and they circ very, very well. Like all of his books circ really, really well. And so do the authors from his publishing imprint, which is nice because like you said, you get perspectives from all over the world. And I mean, my own kids loved, I think that's kind of got them into, it kind of got me back into Greek mythology too, because my kids were reading his books and I read them all too, because he's really good fun. I mean, so thumbs up for me. I mean, anything that is fun and gets kids reading and has that element of just expanding your learning, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think that, in my day job, I work for an advocacy organization, and a lot of what we talk about is not speaking for people who are marginalized, instead handing them the microphone. And I think it's so important that, like Rick Riordan could sit on his giant mountain of money and never do a single thing ever again for publishing, but to explicitly say and act on giving people who are marginalized within publishing the microphone to tell their own stories from their own cultures, and to tell, like new stories in new ways, I think is incredibly important. And so, even though I was at exactly the wrong age for the Percy Jackson books, I was just a little too old. I do think that the initiative, especially within, middle grade and YA, is something that I think more people who have power should try to replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, they're so good. I mean, some of those books are so freaking good. I did not read Percy Jackson I was also too old for it, but I read them as an adult because actually Preeti Chibber, shout out to Preeti, made me read them. She was like, you will now read The Trials of Apollo. I don't care what else you think you have to do, like read it. And I regretted nothing. It was definitely a good time. And I've read a bunch of the books from the imprint, and they have universally been a delight. So, and I so much that mythology that I've never been exposed to that now is like here, it's just right there. It's so good. Lots of gifting going on. We have 3 minutes left. So, if anybody else has a last minute question, get it into the chat, because I could keep going, but like you're here and you probably want to know something. So we're going to make space for that. I do love all of the commentary that we've seen. Hera does need a Reddit relationships intervention. 100%. Nobody? No other questions? Jessica, should I ask another one or should we wrap up? Wait, it's your event.
It is entirely up to you guys, but I mean, at this point, we are more than happy to wrap up. I have a couple of closing things for everybody. Mostly, thank all 4 of y'all so much for being here. It has been a delightful conversation. I've enjoyed every second of it. Y'all are all spectacular, and I am seriously so excited about this book. It's not even funny. And everyone, I love pushing it to people as they like walk into the store. And yes, if you are here and you would like to purchase the book, you can get it from our website, and if you can also order it through the Eventbrite page that got you the link to this. We will still be taking orders until tomorrow morning. And you can, yes, we're just so happy everybody could be here, and thank you times 1,000. So I hope everyone has a great evening, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Everybody buy books from your local independent bookstore.